today. We've got an action-packed meeting, so I'm going to turn it over to Christine to do the introductions and get us going, and I hope we all learn a lot and enjoy each other's company today. So thank you all for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. I just got a comment that we're a very serious group today with a very serious topic. So, Nita Wellington's going to come up and give us a warm-up exercise before we begin with our serious topics.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Morning. That's much better. You know, this is completely unplanned. I was just walking around the room and I was like, why does everybody look so tight in here? So stressed. So here's my first thing. This is a public announcement. This is not a test. So we just take a minute for everyone to loosen up. This is completely volunteer. You know, if you want to, but I think that would just take a moment, and if everyone can stand up. If you don't want to, it's okay, but if you don't, then I'll come and pick on you and make you stand up. So stand up. All right, so there's tons of things to do. I'm a big person on, I don't know, most of you probably do know about mindfulness therapy. So you gotta kind of focus. So basically, what happened before you walked in this door? Let it go. Okay? If you want to pick it up when you finish, that's fine with me. So we want to be present for the moment, see what's going on. This is our time to get together. We don't have time to do this. I'm sure a lot of times you walk in the hallway, you don't even know who you're passing by. You're like, oh, you work here? Oh, nice. So this is a moment to get to know you. We don't have time for everyone to do a hello, but turn to the person and say, hi, and you can meet them. Right? You see faces, so when you're in the hallway, you take a second, because we're all so busy, sometimes you're looking down, take a second, say, hi, how you doing? Maybe I'll meet you in the cafeteria or something. Some people pay attention. Okay, so this is a moment, I love breathing all the time, so if you hear it in the hallway, I'm going to say breathing. So this is going to take a few seconds, we're going to put you in the moment, all right? If you want to close your eyes, you can. If you want to open them and watch me, do that too. All right. A second. You want to hear a pin drop? Don't talk to your friends. Only this time. Okay? Take a moment. Put yourself in the present. Close your eyes. I'm going to talk to you. Okay? Deep breath. Release. Deep breath. Release. Now take a second. I don't know if your fruit, whatever your favorite fruit is, but I'm going to use orange. Everyone has an orange in their hand. It's an imaginary orange. Begin to peel that orange and focus only on the orange. However you want to peel. Start peeling your orange. I'm going to give you a second. Breathe while you're peeling the orange. Your focus is about, you're going to eat this orange. Breathe. The orange is peeled, now you're going to eat it. Focus on eating the orange, how it tastes. Breathe again. Smell the orange, this room is full of oranges. Open your eyes. Very relaxed. Okay, I'm about to go, but I want you to take a moment. All of us have goals in our lives. And you focus, sometimes with everything going on, especially this weather, everything going on, we lose track of things. So right now, I want everyone to stretch, reach for the stars. Stretch them out. Push all the stress aside. Now, you see those big arms? Wrap them around yourself. And one of my favorite things is to kiss myself. Everybody have a great day.
help us all navigate sexual misconduct issues that our students face and that we face in helping them through them. We want to respond in a legal and student-centered way. We want to be supportive, and we want to do no harm. I want to thank the team that helped get together, and that would include Greg Souza, Rhonda Spaziani, Pamela Carrick-Warner, Kathleen O'Reilly, and Jen. So thank you all. We're going to start off with an expert in this field. Mr. Tom Clark is Assistant Counsel for our Board of Regents. He is the advisor for all 17 colleges on all student and legal issues, disability issues, employment law, sexual misconduct, and FERPA. He's been a good resource for Three Rivers and a tremendous help for me. Tom will give us the context today for all our activities, and I want to welcome Mr. Tom Clark.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you, Christine. Pretty generous. I disclaim being an expert at anything, but I appreciate the offer of the compliment. It is, in all modesty and sincerity, a real privilege and a pleasure to share some time with you today, for a couple of reasons for me. One, I found my college time to be the most special time in my life. I look back as I get old and less hair and the color has changed, to think back to the high school senior that graduated and who he was, and the college senior that graduated, and I think they were two different people. The faculty that I had the privilege to learn from changed me from the high school senior to the college senior, and I think certainly had a significant influence on who I am. You are today's embodiment of my faculty who affected this Tom Clark, who affects the Tom Clarks of today. I've had the privilege for the past almost 30 years to work in higher ed in Connecticut in various roles, but most recently the pleasure has been to support the work that you do and the success that you achieve in helping transform the students that you have the privilege to touch on a daily basis. Please know I miss that, but I acknowledge the greatness of the work that you do. The other reason why being with you today is special is because as I wind down to retirement in 146 calendar days, 55, working who's counting? My career sort of here in higher ed in Connecticut started at Mohegan Community College teaching at the sub-base accounting and business law courses. So there's a certain poetry that the beginning and the end are essentially in the same place. I have a task, if I can do this, of sort of laying for you the context of our conversation today, and I think it's coming up, and to sort of remind you that why we're talking about this today, and I'll explain the title of this, is because there is, as John Dean said with regard to Richard Nixon, there's a cancer that's occurring in our society today. I remind you of clergy sex abuse, military sex abuse, of the domestic violence matters that affect our society, be it in the NFL with Ray Rice or otherwise, be it the number of news reports you might see in the evening news with respect to, in the K-12 environment, faculty having inappropriate sexual relationships with students. And of course, the UConn matter that came about a year and a half ago. As a result of all of that, every legal entity that can create a policy, a rule, a regulation, a guidance, a law, be they state or federal, has jumped on the issue and has buried us, much like the snow has, in mandates, official guidance, requirements, and expectations. Many of them are contradictory, many of them are vague, but all of them, because we are places of transformation, we change people, as I mentioned before, there's an expectation that we're going to step up to the plate as well. So today is a brief all too brief, review of what those expectations are. I hope, despite all of this, that you'll walk away with a sense of some information, a sense of some skills. You'll see some things being demonstrated, so that when a student approaches you and begins to have perhaps a conversation about they being a victim of something, that you'll have a good sense of what to do. And in large part up front, I'd like to suggest, and perhaps others will today too, that as Christine alluded to, the first thing that you wish to do is always be professional, supportive, and to assist the student to the best of your ability. Secondly, much like doctors, you want to adopt the Hippocratic Oath approach and do no harm. That's the most important thing. And then probably thirdly, you want to say as little as possible so you can get this student to somebody who really knows what they're doing. Right? So we have a brief set of suggestions for you to do, and we have some variations on that so you can visualize and have a sense as to how you will address this when it happens to you, which is probably at the time when you least expect it to occur. So I'm about to run you through a PowerPoint, and I do mean run you through. I can assure you that if you find anything in here that you think might be interesting, Christine and Greg have a copy of it, and they're happy to share it with you. I'd suggest you take off your snow boots and put on your track shoes because we're about to go for a run. Okay. The title of this, as you can see, is borrowing from one of my favorite movies, and perhaps yours, because back in the day when we all started in our careers, or back when we were students, the world was a whole lot different. And because of the items that I just mentioned to you, it is different. There are different expectations for us. They're not severe, but they are ones that we are expected to implement. What you do reflects, of course, not only on yourself, but it also reflects upon the college and how outsiders like the legislature, Congress, and others. I'll mention OCR, the Office for Civil Rights, U.S. Department of Education, who enforces all these things, will view those. So we ask you to sit back, relax a bit if you can. If you get a little tense because of what we're covering, but we're just trying to give you some kind of a context. So if you're ready, we'll get going. Okay. My first question to you is, and this sort of relates to the title of this, well, what is the college's mission? I would imagine all of you would jump up to say, to provide excellent academic and educational programs, right? Well, remember, we're not in Kansas anymore. Last summer, there was a significant conversation in our office, the Board of Regents office, and we don't publish this for obvious reasons, but regrettably, and I do mean regrettably, the Connecticut State colleges and universities, and individual colleges and universities that make it up, no longer is the prime mission to provide quality academic and educational programs. The first priority, the first mission, is to provide safe campuses. Because the judgment is that if anyone is not safe on our campuses, they cannot succeed in any academic or educational program that we have. Unfortunately, times have changed. So our mission generally is to provide a reasonably safe environment. You can see these things working on down, to be active in the prevention of sexual violence, and to promptly respond supportively, compassionately, and professionally. Right? Doesn't sound like quality academic and educational programs. They're still there, obviously. They're very important. But safety is key. And why have things changed? You've seen some of the statistics, right? These are just some of these. And up front, I have to apologize to you. I've engaged in academic misconduct with this presentation that failed to give you a footnote to where I got these statistics from. So up front, I'm guilty. You know? But look at the numbers, right? These are our sisters and our brothers, our mothers and our fathers, and our kids and their friends. These are our students. In all honesty, they're probably us. Right? What's your responsibility as a faculty member? Very simply, to teach the courses that you're assigned in a manner prescribed by the college. Right? That's it. Right? Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, because of numerous legal measures, including the Board of Regents action, you're also a mandated reporter with regard to sexual violence, intimate partner violence, sexual assault, stalking, domestic violence, dating violence, those kinds of things. A mandated reporter, something they're required to do. There are no confidential relationships at the college. You cannot legitimately promise a student that what they tell you will remain confidential if it involves sexual misconduct, dating violence, domestic violence, those kinds of things. You're under legal obligation to report it. Your responsibilities don't include counseling employees or students who disclose those things. So please understand that nothing that we talk about here today involves you to get into a role of a counseling relationship with a student. In fact, that's discouraged. In the law is very clear that we owe no real duty of care with respect to our students. By that I mean, we can't be careless, we can't intentionally harm them, we can't do those kinds of bad things. But your role is to teach your course. I have a certain role, others here have their own role. None of that involves counseling students per se, except of course folks with the title of counselor in their certain areas. I don't need to exclude them. But what we're talking about here today is that you have a duty of communicating some basic information to the student and to those to whom you report. None of that really involves counseling, and if you do get into a counseling relationship as a faculty member, that the law would then say you've developed this special relationship with the student. And if your carelessness in that special relationship is the direct and immediate cause of harm to that student, then you are liable. And you may not be covered by the state indemnification statute because your job didn't include that, you went outside the scope of your employment, you were acting in a personal capacity, just like if you're shopping at Stop and Shop or whatever, and the state doesn't cover you for that. Just like I assume we all are aware that none of us are authorized to drive students any place in our personally owned vehicles. And if you do, and there's a car accident or some claim for damage or injury, the Attorney General's office will not defend you, and no judgment or settlement will be paid out of state treasury. You're on your own. You better make sure your auto insurance covers that. Many of them don't. Okay? So we need to be very circumscribed with regard to boundaries and limits of what appropriate behavior is. Let's talk about some of the legal parameters that we're talking about. I presume we've all heard of FERPA, at least, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. Federal law adopted in 1974, that's probably the backbone of our relationship with regard to student records, not necessarily with regard to students. But it requires that the college maintain the confidentiality of personally identifiable student information that's maintained in college records. Not to disclose that unless the student has given us a valid consent, or unless one of the limited provisions of FERPA that allows us to disclose information like to each other when our jobs require that, without the student's consent allows for that. But generally, what information we have in student records, right, as opposed to what a student may tell us, is confidential as a matter of law. Just as I presume you wish your doctor to keep those things confidential in the records that you have with him, although I hear this morning Anthem got hacked, and 80 million of us are at risk, but as you presume your credit union, your bank will maintain the confidentiality of your bank records, we're in exactly the same position with regard to student records. They're confidential as confidential can be. The purpose of FERPA is basically to restrict access to student records. Oftentimes police may come in asking for student information. There's generally no exception for the police. Lawyers may contact you on behalf of a client and say, I represent, so give me the information. There's no lawyer exception in it. There may be other exceptions or other things that apply, but generally to maintain, restrict access to records containing student information. Give students a right to inspect and review records. Students have no right to copies of records, not even under the Freedom of Information Act. They only have a right to inspect and review their records, not records pertaining to other students. And to give them the right to seek amendment of their education records. It's not a second grade appeal, right? I'm still angry about that English 101 grade I got, but I don't have a chance to go back. But if they've got information in my records that pertains to some other Tom Clark, unless it's good, I could have them remove that from my record. And except for 2 or 3 very limited circumstances, the case of a sexual assault disciplinary hearing, the case of a subpoena, and of course always with the IRS, you're never obligated to release student information. Surprisingly, even to a student. We give them a transcript, but students don't have a right, as I mentioned before, to a copy of any of their records. They can inspect and review. Some of you may remember what this looks like. This looks very familiar to the one I had in college. This is also sort of a freedom of information suggestion, you know. Except, well, for students who have the right to inspect and review records at the college pertaining to them. And with respect to non-student, generally with some exceptions, the public has the right to see our email. Okay? This is the Norwich Bulletin test, the Hartford Current test, the New London Day test. Be careful what you put in email, right? Maybe at times you just want to pick up one of these, maybe a more modern version, and give somebody a call, right? Because your conversations, if you're like me, we kind of carry on conversations by email as if we were talking to somebody person to person. And you know that stuff never disappears. And we get FOIA requests in our office for all of somebody's email for the past 2 years. And generally, unless there's an exclusion exemption or other provision, we got to provide it. That's tedious, that's embarrassing in some cases. And so when you're talking with a student who has the right to inspect and review those records, be careful what you say. Perhaps you want to pick up the phone instead. One of the exceptions that I mentioned to the consent is legitimate educational interest. Under FERPA, employees have the right to student information if they have a legitimate educational interest, and we're going to talk about that a little bit with the scenarios in a little while. And in plain English, a legitimate educational interest is a need to know. I need to know that in order to perform the duties of my job. Right? But it has to be a legitimate need. When I did student conduct, I remember faculty would send over plagiarism allegations, and I would meet with the student, and then the faculty member would want to know what the outcome was. You know, and I was in the untenable position, sorry, of having to say, can't tell you. Right? And the question was, why? I said, well, what's your legitimate educational interest in knowing what the outcome of this disciplinary process was? Right? Well, it's my report. No, it's not really your report, all due respect. Yeah, I appreciate you sending it over. Us working together really helps work best to help develop responsible adult, mature citizens in society, right? But there's no provision under FERPA that says somebody who submits a plagiarism report gets to know what the outcome of the disciplinary process is, right? Well, I have a legitimate interest. Well, what's your interest? Well, I'm curious. We're all about it. Enhancing a curiosity to learn. That's a good thing, but not in this case, you know. So you have to legitimately have a reason. You need to be able to do it to perform the duties. How does it make you teach better to know what the outcome of that one was? You know, if you can answer that question, then maybe we can consider releasing that information. So even amongst ourselves, we need to keep it as confidential as possible. So let's get more specific to sexual misconduct, stalking, those kinds of things. You've all heard of Title IX, right? This is it. There's nothing in there that I see that talks about all the stuff we're going to talk about today. And it only comes about because this was adopted in 1972. And most people think of it applying in athletics, you know, that women's sports have to be funded to the same extent essentially as men's sports do and that kind of thing. But that's a mistake, and I think we've come to realize that in the last couple of years. It applies to students, it applies to employees, it applies in every activity that we engage in, not just athletics. Sexual harassment, sexual misconduct are all a form of a violation of Title IX. The concept from the U.S. Department of Education and all the stuff that they've provided, the courts have provided, Congress, the state legislature have provided, is that a person who is suffering the effects of sexual misconduct, sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual exploitation, sexual harassment, stalking, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, those kinds of things, is unable to enjoy the benefits of the education program or activity involved. They're being discriminated against based on their gender in order to play. So it's a derivative, if you would, not an explicit, as so oftentimes is the case with the law. Another provision that kind of comes as an offshoot in recent years, the Office for Civil Rights of both the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Justice entered into a resolution agreement, a consent decree, if you would, a way to resolve it without going to court, with the University of Montana, that they were investigating based upon a complaint that they had an incorrect definition of what sexual harassment was and their procedures were inappropriate. And the resolution agreement has been sort of held up as a gold standard, right? That all colleges and universities should meet this standard, and part of that was that responsible employees on campus are mandated reporters. And a responsible employee is defined to be an employee who has the authority or ability to address a complaint of sexual misconduct, intimate partner violence, stalking, those kinds of things. More importantly, and more, in a sense, more difficult, it also goes on to say by OCR's guidance that a responsible employee can be designated by the institution or is anyone that a student reasonably believes to be a responsible employee. That is, it could be that PTL, who's teaching a Friday night class, at the end of which a student comes up and starts talking about sexually assault. And if that student reasonably believes that PTL is a responsible employee, then they have some obligations. So we, in the system, have an obligation to make sure we reach out to all faculty to make sure that they're aware of what their obligations are, because if they don't meet those obligations, it can create liability for the college and for the system. Hard to reach all those people and equip them with what they need to know. So we've all been made responsible employees, somewhat as an offshoot of that. You may be familiar with the Jean Cleary Act. Jean Cleary was a student one of the Patriot League schools whose names escape me because I'm getting old and tired and gray and the memories is sort of what it used to. Unfortunately, she was raped and killed in her dormitory, and her parents, Howard Cleary and his wife, were able to persuade Congress that what colleges and universities need to do is provide consumer information up front. For people considering coming to campus, they need to know what the policies were, what the crime experience had been for the past 3 years, and that needed to be made available so that they could consider whether it was a safe campus to attend. Under the Cleary Act, a college can designate, there are by law certain people, but the college can also designate certain campus security authorities. These are people who are also mandated reporters for all the crimes under the Cleary Act, which are much broader than sex-related crimes in large part. Those people who generally fall in the category by law of campus security authorities and who need to be trained regarding their responsibilities include, certainly for our purposes, your purposes, Dean of Students, Director of Student Activities, and you folks, not while you're in the classroom solely, but if you're an advisor to a student group. Student affairs professionals, right? And those who may otherwise mentor student groups. That means if you get information regarding sexual misconduct, you cannot keep it quiet. You have a duty to share that information promptly. Right? Just another way, in addition to the requirement of the responsible employee. Our legislature, of course, in Connecticut has not been lazy on this topic. They've, in the last couple of years, regarding a number of publicized incidents, including some within the state, most recently UConn, has adopted a couple of provisions. There's one prior to this, I forgot to include, Public Act 1278, which requires that we provide to students and employees brief, concise notification of resources available, their rights to law enforcement, their rights to where confidential services are, the importance of preserving evidence. I say it's brief and concise notification, which it is, but if you type it out single space, it's 8 pages. And everyone says that's not an effective way to communicate with students because it reads 8 typewritten pages. So, we're supposed to do student videos, we're supposed to do graphs on the website, we're supposed to do bits and pieces, and it's a difficult task to meet. Most recently, though, getting back to the mandated reporter issue, Public Act 14-186 addresses a DCF situation, right? That is somebody under the age of 18. And this past year, the legislature made any paid administrator, in fact, not overpaid or underpaid, but just any paid administrator, faculty, staff, athletic director, coach, athletic trainer, a lot like those that were the campus security authorities, a mandated reporter with regard to DCF. And the board adopted, because it has to do that, the law dictates it, a similar policy. But this requires that if the victim is under age 18, and I want to be clear, the reported victim, because using the word victim seems to presuppose a judgment that may be premature at the very least. But a reported victim who's under 18, there's an extreme requirement in terms of time that any college employee who gets that information, that fell in that category, has 12 hours to report it to their supervisor and to DCF. Failure to do that can involve some liability under law. In other words, it has to be very, very prompt. So when dealing with students, let me just make this suggestion. I'm going to ask a silly question. Any students here under age 18? Do you know? Okay. When you know, or perhaps you should need to ask, you have a DCF reporting responsibility in addition to internally with regard to that. Right? So always it's a question of how old is the person who's talking to me about something like that. The board also adopted, because of all this, sexual misconduct, sexual assault, and intimate partner violence policy, which makes all of us mandated reporters. So in addition to legal requirements, we have policy requirements that require us to be mandated reporters. Congress, not being uninvolved in all of this, and I should mention Senator Blumenthal has a bill pending in Congress that expands a lot of these requirements. It's the Campus Accountability and Safety Act. And Senator Boxer from California also has another one involved, another bill pending. So if they're adopted, it's going to increase the additional guidance. But the Campus SAVE Act, or the Campus Sexual Assault Elimination Act, which are constitute amendments to the Violence Against Women Act, which essentially constitutes amendments to the Clery Act, kind of thing, extends a lot of the requirements that we're going to talk about today from what they used to be and what they are under state law, but on their own to employees as well. That is to say, so if an employee comes up to you, a colleague, and saying, something that leads you to believe that sexual harassment, sexual assault, sexual misconduct, domestic violence, stalking, all that occurred, you can't sit on that. And I'm going to say something here that really makes me uncomfortable, and I hope it doesn't offend you. But at some places, I'm sure not here, I hope not here, there are some of us, older adults, who engage in intimate relationships with students on campus that at least may be questionable. Perhaps it's a student in class, perhaps it's a student that they supervise, perhaps it's just a student. If we know of inappropriate colleague relationships with students, that may be a mandated reporter issue. We can't just sit on that. Privacy is pretty limited with regard to that, so please, please, please. 1411 is a very broad statute that we're going to talk about in some depth, adopted here in Connecticut. It sort of parallels the Campus SAVE Act in many respects, but imposes a lot of other requirements as well that we're struggling to understand and implement. One of them that we're going to be talking about here is real important, is by October 1 of this year, we need to provide specific data to the state legislature and do it every year. And it's regarding the number of students and employees who come to us to report or disclose instances of sexual misconduct, so on and so forth. One of the campuses among us tells me that in 2013, that calendar year, as we report on a calendar year basis, they had less than 5 disclosures or reports of sexual misconduct at that time. Their most recent count for 2014 is that in 2014 they had 85. Students and employees know about this. Right? They're looking to seek out for assistance and utilize that assistance. The number's going to jump. And you probably know from the general news, if you've watched the legislature, I can tell you from personal experience testifying twice on this bill before the legislature. The legislature doesn't see us as doing all that we should be doing. Right? They expect a lot more. To say they may be a little bit hostile or suspect to what we say would probably be an understatement. Right? And I'm afraid when we report, when our office is going to report for all 17, Excel spreadsheet across the board, and you see the difference in numbers, not only from 13 to 14, perhaps, so we won't have 13 data, but they'll be looking at our Clery reports. But when they look between the different results for the different colleges and universities, they're going to draw some conclusions without a lot of other information. And some of those conclusions are going to be unwarranted, unfounded, but some of them might be pretty solid. You know, a high number is not a bad thing. It means people are utilizing services. Right? But some people see a high number as a bad thing. So what, under 1411, we need to talk a little bit about what must the college report? What do we have to provide ultimately? You're going to provide to our office and we're going to send it up to the legislature. A copy of, the law says the college's most recent policies regarding these kinds of things. As a lawyer, I got to say this. We use, all of us, I think, use the word policies in a non-legal sense, and that gets dangerous for us lawyers who can only think of things in a legal sense. Only the Board of Regents is authorized to make policy and to use that term in a legally correct way. By statute, that's it. You all can make procedures, guidelines, standards, protocols, but we tend to use the word policies like we use Kleenex when we need a tissue, right? Or Coke when we want a cola, you know, or we're going to go make a Xerox when we're going to make a copy of something, right? The specific has become the generic in a manner of speaking. But please, please, please be sensitive that if you have anything on it that says policy and it's yours, I encourage you to reconsider the use of that term. But we're going to submit our stuff, right? But you guys will have a campus resource team, and probably do, that's going to review that to see how efficient and effective it is, right? A copy of what you're going to develop is your most recent concise written notification of the rights and options, you know, that 8-page single-spaced document that hopefully you won't have, but you'll have a video, you'll have some charts and graphs and handouts and those kinds of things. The number and types of sexual assaults, awareness programs, awareness campaigns, and risk reduction programs that you've offered. Many of you may be familiar, hopefully you are, with the online program called Haven that EverFi has made available to us free for this year. It's a program that, you know, in all honesty, they'll even say it's not the best, but it has a national profile, and it gives us the opportunity to do some of this programming, reaching out to those who, you know, aren't on campus a lot, you know, and the more we can reach to them in that fashion, or in any other fashion that's effective, the better we do the job. So we're going to have to provide a number and probably a description of those kinds of things. And we've always advised colleges and universities to document, keep a copy of all of that, so that it's available in case anybody inquires, let me see what you're doing, right? Not just the number. Of course, the type of sexual assault stalking, otherwise campaigns, and just to be clear, a primary prevention program is different than an awareness campaign. You know, prevention program is techniques to avoid it from happening. The awareness campaign is to raise an understanding of the extent of the problem in society or on campus. And I think your campus is probably going to be doing a campus climate survey at some point, which is mandated, which gives you the opportunity to reach out to others to let you know what their experience is in a credible, presumably confidential sort of way. You know, I work with colleges who have to undergo once a year a civil rights compliance review with the federal government. And I can't tell you how many, I think we're on our 5th college, that when we plan for the on-site review, when the team comes in to talk to students and faculty and others, the college says, we don't have a problem, you know, nobody reports this stuff to us. Until you talk to faculty and staff and students, and you get an earful. And so there's a lot going on out there that we're unaware of, as we naturally should be. But we need, by law, to reach out in a way so that people can give us a sense of what we don't know. Bystander intervention is how those of us who are not necessarily a subject, will be a victim of, can help those who are in the process of perhaps becoming, to avoid that from happening. You know, something about a community looking out for each other. In addition to what we need to report, the number of instances of sexual assault, stalking, and partner violence that have been reported to the college. Right? This kind of comes into what we're talking about here today. By reported to the college, what's the college? Right? It's all of us in this room and more. So when somebody reports something to you, you're part of the college, and the college has a duty to collect that information. The number of confidential or anonymous reports or disclosures to the college of sexual assault, right? There's a sort of a distinction between a disclosure and a report, as you can see underlined here. It's kind of splitting a hair, but you know, the legislature never defines the key essential terms. They kind of leave it for us to figure out. In working with the sexual assault crisis centers in Connecticut and domestic violence centers in Connecticut, we've come to a generally understanding, for our purposes, at least initially in this first year as we're trying to implement all this, as to what is a disclosure. A disclosure is a communication by an individual, an employee or a student, to a college, not requesting an investigation or adjudication. In that case, the response is, there are support services available. I want to make that information available to you. I want you to know that we care and we'll help you in any way that we can. Okay? There's the duty to make accommodations. The student says, he's in my class, I want to be in another section, or, you know, we gotta take action, right? A report is sort of the first part of that, disclosure, plus a request for an investigation and adjudication. Okay? So it means, I'm reporting this, and I want you to do something about it, right? So it means you do. But let me backtrack a little bit. Under Title IX, there's an absolute duty to investigate both of these. It's just with a disclosure, there may not be an ability to. So the student comes forward and says, I'm experiencing the, wouldn't say it this way, this is the lawyer talking. I'm experiencing the manifestations of sexual assault by my father when I was 5 years old. All right? Well, how do you investigate that? You know, you can't, you know. But it's still a disclosure. You still have the duty to accommodate and provide the services along the way because they're suffering at this point. The college also has to report the number of disciplinary cases and the final outcome of all of those disciplinary cases. I can tell you the legislature wants them all arrested and thrown in jail. Even though those are alleged or ultimately determined perpetrators are also our students. And in the meantime, until they're determined not to be our students, they're still a member of our community and they deserve the same fairness and treatment as the reporting victim does. So it puts us in the middle of all these kinds of things. So what's your duty? Right? Your duty is to respond supportively, compassionately, professionally as a mandated reporter when these kinds of things come up. You have in the brochure, and we're going to be talking about it a bit more today, sort of a script, you know. What do I say? How do I say it? Right? In your own words. In large part, be yourself, but we kind of give you some words to kind of think about as to how they might come out for you. And always, 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 always refer the student to all kinds of support services along the way. Some of you may wish to put in a syllabus sort of this warning. We sort of, the team and all of us, kind of struggle with this warning that we have to give to students that we're a mandated reporter. So what you tell me I cannot keep secret as to what to call that warning. You know, warning kind of sounds something like, you know, watch out, Will Robinson, you know, warning, warning. I tend to call it a Miranda warning because that seems to convey it, but there's nothing really criminal about all of this. It doesn't seem to be the right context, so don't know what to call it. One of your colleague institutions and some of the faculty in the psychology and sociology courses have developed this syllabus statement, which will be on the PowerPoint should you wish. And here's the language that we've had with regard to this warning. And again, it'll be on the PowerPoint should you wish to get it. And it's a little wordy, and I'm running a little late. And so with that, I think we've covered the terrain to give you an opportunity to understand what stakeholders expect of us, and hopefully to solicit your comfortable cooperation in meeting the needs of students when they come to you to express something that has happened to them on a limited basis, just as a reminder. You know, if you want to be compassionate, supportive, and professional, you want to provide them information for support services, you want to say as little as possible, right? First do no harm until you can get them to somebody who knows better what they're doing, right? I think that's it. Right? Okay. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tom. The brochure that Tom was just referring to is on the table with a lot of other information, but this one with the 2 students is the 1, 2, 3 guide for faculty and staff when you're presented with a disclosure. So, yes?
Can I ask for a point of clarification? Did I understand correctly that if a student comes in and they were sexually assaulted previously, maybe during their childhood, that we're required to report that?
Yes. Yes. I will say this very broadly, if you all can hear me okay. All the guidance from federal, state, every agency along the way, a mandated reporter is that we have to report anything that anybody says to us, regardless of where it happens, when it happens, by whom, who happened it to them. Sorry for the grammatical, trying to go on the same way. The only 2 exceptions where there's guidance is if a person holds a statutory privilege and a license in that regard. Sexual assault counselor, an attorney-client privilege, priest-penitent privilege, therapist-patient privilege, that in the context of that, There's no specific reporting that needs to take place, although there are numerical requirements, data at the end of the year. How many reported what kinds of stuff, right? The other is that OCR has said if you have a Take Back the Night event, something very similar to that, and a speaker talks about their sexual assault, that's not a disclosure or a report. You're not a mandated reporter for that. Other than those two, if the topic of sexual assault occurs, that somebody's experienced that, harassment, domestic violence, report it. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Very non-lawyer-like to be clear, but
That's fine.
Well, at this point, I'd like to introduce our talented Title IX officer, Greg Souza. And thanks to Greg, all the reporting requirements and other requirements that Tom just went through, Three Rivers is in very good shape. We're in compliance with all of them. We're on target and we're in good shape. So let me introduce you to Greg Souza.
Thanks, everybody, and thank you, Christine. So, right now, it's my absolute pleasure to invite up to the stage the first of two members of our community crisis organizations. We partnered as an agency, as an institution, with the Sexual Assault Crisis Center of Eastern Connecticut and with Safe Futures. These two organizations provide the kinds of confidential, victim-centered, trauma-informed services that so many people in our community need. They do it free of charge, they do it 24 hours a day, and I am personally enormously grateful to them. They've been an absolute delight to work with. They've done a lot for this institution, behind the scenes and in front, and they have been enormously valuable partners. So with that, and presuming my PowerPoint still exists where I thought it was, sorry about that. Get on me. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. With that, I'd like to invite up Jessica Martin from the Sexual Assault Crisis Center of Eastern Connecticut. Jessica?
Good morning, can everyone hear me? Okay, my name is Jessica Martin. I'm from the Sexual Assault Crisis Center of Eastern Connecticut. Quick background about me, I actually got my start working with victims in the military. I served 9 years in the Coast Guard prior to working for this particular company. So while I was in the Coast Guard, I was a victim advocate for the military, so I did a lot of this stuff on the military side. As well as doing that, I also volunteered for the civilian side, so I got to kind of see a little bit of both fields, which was fantastic. The way the military does it is a little bit different. So then when I went from active duty to the reserves, I actually got an opportunity to work the civilian side full-time, which has been fantastic. So I just want to give a little bit of an idea of what we do. First of all, we have 2 offices, one in New London and one in Willimantic. We cover all of Windham and New London counties. So everything inside of those 2 counties we deal with. That includes 4 hospitals, 9 colleges and universities, 2 child advocacy centers, one in New London, one in Putnam, and any case that gets reported to us for all of those areas. So it's a really big area. We have 2 24-hour hotlines, one in Spanish and one in English. What that means is that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if somebody were to call a phone number, they're going to be connected with a qualified sexual assault crisis counselor. The counselor is going to be able to talk to them, get them past the particular crisis that they're having at the moment. Generally, when somebody calls the hotline, it means that they are in a state of crisis. Something happened. It doesn't always mean that something happened right then. It could be something happened several years ago, but they were watching Lifetime or a movie or something. It reminded them of that, and they're really having a hard time. So what the hotline does is it allows us the opportunity to help them through that particular moment. If something did happen right then, that comes to the next step of what we do. We do accompaniment. Accompaniment and advocacy throughout all of the steps of sexual violence. So we go to hospitals and emergency rooms for doctor's appointments, forensic exams, anything like that. including all 4 of the major hospitals in those 2 counties. We go to court, we go to police stations, we can accompany throughout the college experience, so any Title IX meetings, if you need to go see health services, if you want to go to a women's center, we can come with you to all of those things. We do crisis counseling as well at both of our New London and Willimantic offices, as well as at colleges as well. So if the student does not want to go or can't make it to one of the offices, we'll actually come to them and we'll meet them at the school. We do referrals for therapy, medical support, general assistance, victim compensation. So anything that we're not clinical counselors, we are crisis counselors. So if they need to actually talk to a therapist, a psychologist, something like that, we will refer them out. We also refer out to lawyers, all sorts of different people that can help them move through the process as best as they can. We run support groups, community prevention and education programs, and then, like I said, we have the 2 children's centers that we cover as well. As briefly mentioned, the children's cases are a little different. Anyone under the age of 18 is going to also be covered by the Department of Children and Families. They have what's called a team. So their team, they have police officers, they have crisis counselors, they have DCF, they have a prosecutor, and everybody works together to make sure that that child is getting the best care that they need. So we are able to do that, which is a fantastic thing. Everybody who works for the Crisis Center goes through a lot of training before we get there. Everybody holds a degree, regardless of whether it's a bachelor's degree or a master's, usually in either work or psychology. You go through 40 hours of sexual assault counseling and training, and then we have continuous direct supervision by counselors at the Crisis Center with the primary purpose of rendering advice, counseling, assistance, and advocacy. So even as we continue going, it's one of those things that they teach you that you're never done learning. So each client, each case is going to be different. Nothing is ever the same. So we do have continuous counseling on that as well. And then really quick, the other thing I wanted to mention was the statute that allows us to be protected and confidential. We are 100% confidential, so anything that anybody tells us, we are not required to tell anybody, with the 2 exceptions of if they are going to harm themselves or harm others. Other than that, everything is 100% confidential. The only mandated reporting we fall under is if we are the first person to hear about a victim of child assault, in which case we would have to involve DCF. Other than that, we are not required to tell anybody, and that comes from the Connecticut General Statute 52 TAC 146K. So we are covered. It also covers any crisis center and domestic violence center as well. I believe in your brochures and everything, it has all of our phone numbers for both of our offices and also for our hotline. And with that, does anybody have any questions for me? Great, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Now, I'd also like to welcome up another representative from another one of our partner agencies, Antoinette Cabana from Save Futures. Antoinette.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Greg, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you a bit about Save Futures. It's interesting to listen to my colleague at the Crisis Center at the Crisis Center, because our work is so similar and we're dedicated to have the same purpose in mind. Formally, Save Futures was formerly the Women's Center. I just want to tell you a little bit about our work, what it is, and what services we provide to our Save Futures community, which is New London County. And now Save Futures presents itself on campus through our partnership with Three Rivers Community College. It will afford us the opportunity to provide services we offer Safe Futures Agency to this community. So I think I can best describe Safe Futures through the work our advocates do and where they do it. The Safe Futures Agency began in 1976. It was a source of refuge for women and children suffering from the devastation and trauma that are the direct results of domestic violence. Genesis Domestic Violence Emergency Shelter was the first Safe Futures facility created for these women and families to escape this violence. It provides a safe, secure, and supportive environment to heal and begin a new life. The Genesis House Shelter is staffed 24/7 and has the capacity to shelter 16 people, single women and mothers with children. It is a very busy, active house, and we like it that way. We also provide shelter for male victims of domestic violence and counseling and information to male victims of sexual assault. The advocates who work at the shelter provide case management, emotional support, and very much more. When the office is closed and all through the weekends, the shelter advocates staff to have the hotlines, and they are the first contact for a person in crisis, whether it be domestic violence or sexual assault. We basically give the same information, the same guidance, the same support, essential numbers and contacts, and if they are not going to be sheltered, which occasionally they are not going to be, they may go to family, we still have a cycle and a circle of continued work that each one of the staff does at different times. So when the hotline call comes in, we find shelter if they need it. We create an extensive safety plan, give emotional support, and provide vital contact information to the victim. And so through this entire process, the confidentiality is extremely critical. And that is utmost in our work, because there are so many opportunities for the abusers to manipulate the system, to somehow get in touch. And now, in this day and age, with all the options we have with the internet and ways to find people, it's becoming more and more difficult to protect these victims. Safe Futures has expanded our hotline services to include something that's called the Lethality Assessment Program, LAP, which allows the police to assess the lethality of the domestic violence event that is taking place. Through a series of questions, they can determine the lethality of that domestic violence event. The police immediately contact the agency's hotline. The advocate will provide support and offer all the services available through this partnering with the police departments of Connecticut and all of Connecticut State Police. We are able to provide a safe outcome for more victims and save lives. The Safe Future Advocates in the Counseling and Advocacy Department counsel clients concerned with domestic violence and sexual assault issues. We at Safe Futures provide the same service related to sexual assault as our colleagues at the Sexual Assault Crisis Center. We also, if we get a phone call, which we do many times from the hospital, from a doctor or a nurse, we go there as advocates and support the client. We are with them through all of that very painful, hard work that has to be done for them because they were sexually assaulted. And then again, we offer the same services. We are there. We contact our counseling department and make sure that the victim is aware that they can call us 24 hours a day. If they don't feel quite comfortable coming in, we want them to know we're there to support them. If they decide 2 or 3 weeks later, or 2 or 3 months later, that they've had it and they want to come in, we tell them, we are here for you. You are now our client, you are part of the community. We are invested in your well-being. So Safe Futures Advocates and Counseling and Advocacy, they also handle hotlines during the day. So our agency very much is a cycle, a 24/7 cycle, serving the community all the time. And there's always availability. So a phone call never goes with a hang-up or we can't help you. Which makes it interesting because there's always points in time where you're going to get a phone call you didn't expect and you're handling a situation that's very new. And we find that here. No two situations are alike. They're all extremely different. And the individuals involved in them have their own unique needs and they are suffering, all of them. Then we also have the Phoenix House Transitional Living, which came into being in 1991. It has apartments, it provides apartments and advocacy for families in transition. And we have a VIP program that teaches domestic violence and takes it into the community. So we're in schools, where we do adult groups, sessions, so we can work with victims of domestic violence, and we can bring our services and what we've learned and start where the children are, and at the beginning, to make them aware of events that happen in their lives that they might not realize are the beginnings of sexual discrimination, domestic violence, or sexual assault. And it is all about learning for all of us. And we also have, I don't want to forget, this is very important, we have advocates working with victims at the London and Norwich courthouses in victim advocacy services. And that number, when the hotline call happens, and the first responder is the police, and then, or maybe not the police, maybe us, the hotline. We give the victims all this information. We connect with them and ask them if they would like us to contact our advocates at the court to support them the next day. If the abuser if there's going to be a trial, a case, it's going to come up, and if the abuser will be in court. This provides such a sense of peace to the victim and such a sense of not being alone. And so they can call the victim, the advocate, or the victim advocate can call them and make preparations for them, let them know exactly what's going on, and if they have to be in court. For a lot of these women, they may have been through the process of court, a lot of them not. But it doesn't matter because, quite frankly, it's a frightening experience, no matter what time and how many times they've gone through it. And sometimes it's more frightening because it was nearly lethal. So, and we have Kayla Lathrop, who we worked with here, and she works very closely with the Norwich Police Department and also oversees the courts. So I've given you a kind of a brief overview of Safe Futures Agency, what we do and what we are. We at the agency are always eager for the opportunity to expand our services out into the community. It allows us to evolve and learn and grow along with the community we serve. That is why we are so pleased to be working with everyone at Three Rivers, especially at this particular point in time. when our society is in the midst of evaluating and restructuring its thinking regarding sexual assault, domestic violence, social interactions, and gender issues, to name a few. Since September, I have had the pleasure of working alongside a very dedicated, knowledgeable, and kind faculty. I have had the opportunity to meet and work with young people in crisis, others seeking support and guidance about a situation or issue in their lives that they have been reticent to share with anyone because the issue was related to domestic violence or sexual assault. We also, and Greg and I speak often about this different population and how these young people, this critical point of time in their lives, when they're developing relationships, when they are maturing and going out into the world and participating and developing friendships. Some of them, this is a population that really is not going to be aware unless we all work to educate them and let them know that this all can change and it all can be different. And they're ready and they're very eager. They need to be guided and they need support. So it's a critical time, and it's an important time for us to do this work here. When I'm asked by faculty to provide support and information to a college community member in crisis, my job is that of an advocate. And my first consideration is for the individual's safety, well-being, confidentiality. And since I've been here and since I've had the experience of working with so many of you, we are able to, because we work together, there's a sense that the student feels heard, the student feels supported, because you all have given us the opportunity to be there as an advocate for the student, as a support, and to provide information that they may never have the opportunity to have unless we were there. And it allows us to have a more expansive view of a situation we're dealing with. Because again, every event, every crisis is different. Everyone is unique. And we have to come up with new ideas about how to do this. This really, I feel strongly that all the issues related to domestic violence and sexual assault are rapidly shifting and changing. These are old, painful issues that cause much suffering and loss. And we, as a society, must create an environment that will not accept the old ways of dealing with these problems. We must step into the fray, look at methods of educating the public and ourselves, and be a positive presence in the circumstances where we can make a difference.
Thank you very much, Antoinette. I want to emphasize that another thing that makes Antoinette so special here is that St. Futures has been generous enough to donate her time to us. Every Wednesday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Antoinette is actually available here in Student Services in room A119D to speak with students confidentially. Essentially, A119D becomes an embassy to St. Futures at the time that she's there. So, we can always refer our students to Antoinette's services. Now, of course, we always have the ability to refer our students to the 24-hour services of either of these centers, but if we're looking for a person on campus, If you want to learn more about the organization or want your students to be aware of or have easy access to the organization, please remember Antoinette's here every week, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. in student services, and she has her own extension here on campus. So, with that, we're going to move on to the next major point of the agenda for today. First off, let me just thank all of you in advance for your participation. By no means is this an easy discussion to have. This is a difficult conversation under any circumstances. And I do want to emphasize that though we all have a lot of different responsibilities here on campus, one thing that I think is true of all of us is we're in the business of helping people. That's why we're here. That's why we do what we do. And today's all about that, making sure that we have the tools to help people as best we possibly can. And we're all learning on best practices, the best ways to approach that. But that's what brings us here today. And now, in order to accomplish that, okay, so it's occurred to me that we are running long. So, that having been said, let's take our break now. We'll come back in 15 minutes, and then we'll have a day at the theater. So, see you all very, very soon.